Hi, and welcome to Studio SN. My name is Sara Naumann, and today we're stamping with gelatos. Gelato pigment sticks are perfect for coloring stamped images, and they're also really fun for creating dimensional stamped backgrounds. Both techniques I've used on the front of my card here. And I wanted to point out what I meant by dimensional stamped backgrounds. This area here and all back in here on this craft piece of cardstock, that has been stamped using an acrylic block, and it's resulted in some texture and dimension. You can probably see it as I tilt it, but you could definitely feel it. It feels almost a little bit gritty, that raised area there. So that's the background, and then I've also used gelatos to color in my stamped flowers on here. So two techniques, both really easy to do. So let's get started with the background, and I'll show you how I've done that. So the background has been stamped onto a piece of craft cardstock. I realize it's a little tricky to see against the color of my craft sheet on here, but this is going to come in handy as well. Now the stamp that I'm working with is not actually a stamp in the traditional sense. It is an acrylic block. So normally I would put my red rubber stamps on here, my cling stamps on here. But in this case, I'm just using the block itself. Now I've had this block for a while, and you'll notice that it's a little bit stained and definitely scratched up, but none of that will really impact the technique that I'm about to do. So this is the block that I'm using, and then I'm also going to use my my gelatos. Now, if you haven't worked with gelatos before, this is what they look like. They're from a company called Faber-Castell, and a gelato is basically a pigment stick inside this tube. And the tube will remind you a lot of a lipstick or a lip balm. And what's really nice about them, all you need to do is just take off the cap, and then you've got this wonderful tube of pigment in here. You can use them wet or dry. You can mix them with lots of different other mediums, and they're just a lot of fun to use. So the one I'm using here, this is called Bubblegum, the Bubblegum Pink, and that's going to be for my background. Now to create the dimension, I'm also using Grunge Paste. Grunge Paste is from PaperArtsy, and this is a really cool medium, especially for mixing with gelatos, or you could mix it with lots of other color mediums as well, because it's that nice putty color. And as I'm getting this sort of mixed in a little bit, I'm going to just mix it up to refresh it a little bit. I'm using a palette knife, and I think you can see the consistency of this. It's pretty thick, but it's also definitely liquidy enough to be mixed and manipulated. So I'm just going to get some of this off here and just put it down right onto my craft sheet with using this palette knife. And then I'm going to put the lid back on right away. You really do want to keep this capped so that it doesn't dry out. So I've got my grunge paste ready to go. I'm going to set my cardstock aside, and then I just need to scribble some of the gelato color just right onto my craft sheet. So I'm going to scribble this on here using fairly firm pressure and get that cap back on there. And then I'm just going to start mixing the two together. So you can see how nicely that will blend. And I'm kind of using the side of my palette knife to scrape off the gelato from my craft sheet. My craft sheet takes a lot of wear and tear, and it's definitely holding up. So I'm just going to use this as my palette for mixing this. And of course, the more gelato color I use, the more vivid that color will be also. And the more of the grunge paste I mix in, then it will be a little bit more muted. So I'll scrape this up over here too so nothing goes to waste, and making a nice colored grunge paste effect. And then maybe work in a little bit more of that white. And then I can go ahead and put it up onto my block. So again, using the palette knife, and the palette knife is just invaluable for this technique, or really most grunge paste techniques actually. And I'm just going to apply this on here, kind of like frosting a cake. Okay, so just swirling it on there. You don't want a super thick layer, but you do want to get enough on there that it will transfer onto your cardstock. And scrape this up. And I've actually got some areas that are not entirely blended. They are still that kind of whitish putty color of the grunge paste. So that's going to offer some nice variety. scrape it all up, get it all on there, and then I'm going to set aside my palette knife, bring back in my craft cardstock, and then I'm just going to press this straight down. I'm not squashing it, I'm just pressing it, and then I'm going to lift it straight up. So you need to hold on to your cardstock when you do that. And then you end up with this very cool kind of organic effect. And because you're lifting it up straight up, you're also getting some peaks and textured areas on here too. Now I still have some grunge paste on here. I'm going to turn this around to go the other way and press again. And again, lifting straight off. So it's going to give me a little bit more of the texture and the pattern on here. You could turn it again and press it down if there's some areas that you wanted to get more color on, and so on. So then you're going to get a really cool background. Now you still have some more of the grunge paste on here. Do be sure to clean that off your block pretty quickly because it does dry pretty quickly. So I'm just going to clean this up over here, and then while this is still wet, and I mentioned it does dry pretty quickly, so you want to work a bit more quickly with this, I'm going to add a little bit of sparkle. And I'm working with the Pink Sorbet embossing glitter. This is from Wow Embossing Powders, and I'm going to use this not as an embossing powder, but the glitter properties of it. So I have a circle punched piece of scrap cardstock. This is going to be my applicator. And then I'm just going to sprinkle some of this on here. This just gives another layer of texture and dimension, and also a little bit of color and shine. And you don't need a whole lot. You could see I just sprinkled on a little bit, and that's going to give a little bit more shine. Now I just need to let this set aside to dry, and while it does, I'm going to bring in my stamps and do some stamping. So the stamps I'm using are the Eclectica line from PaperArtsy. This is ESN14, and I'm going to stamp with these two flowers, the large and the small. And I'm going to show the technique to you using the small flowers. So set my stamps aside, and I've got my red rubber stamp up onto another one of my clear acrylic blocks, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp this using jet black archival ink. So I want to use a waterproof ink for this technique because I'm going to work with the gelatos while they're wet. So I want to make sure I don't end up smearing it. So I've got my ink on here, and I'm just working with a regular piece of white cardstock, not glossy, but a matte cardstock. And then I have my stamped image. Now I can go ahead and color it in. And with this flower, I'm going to do two colors. I'm going to go back to the bubblegum pink and also use some red cherry. So I'm just going to scribble this once again onto my craft sheet and add a little bit of that red cherry on there too. Then I'm going to spritz with water right next to each one of the colors. I'm not spritzing right into it. If I spritz the water next to the color, I can actually get a little bit more control over the amount of color and the wateriness. And I'm going to use my finger. Of course you could use a paintbrush, but I kind of like using my finger for this because I have a better sense of applying it. I think it just blends a little bit more easily. And I'm just putting it right directly onto my flower on here. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of the red and add some red in here in some areas. I'm not worried about the rest of the outside area of my flower because I'm going to cut them all out. So if you weren't cutting them all out, you might want to use a paintbrush to keep within those lines. So I'm just going to go ahead and let that dry. It would only take a minute or two. And then I can go ahead and cut out my flowers and start stacking and layering them. So this is how I colored some of the flowers. The others, of course, you can see are blue, and that was done with snow cone. So this is the snow cone blue gelato, and you can see the blue on here as well. So I simply cut all of those out, added some buttons as my flower centers, and then pop these up on foam tape. Now when this is dry, then you can go ahead and add your flowers onto it. The black going around the outside edge here, I just did a little bit of pen work with that and just drew a freehand rectangle around the outside of my stamped background. And then I have my stamped sentiment down here. This is, of course, also from the Eclectica stamp set. It's right down here. It goes along with those floral images. and just stamp down at the bottom with black ink. So this is how you can use gelatos for stamping, creating backgrounds, and coloring your stamped images. I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more ideas and inspiration, please stop by my website at saranaumann.com. If you enjoyed today's video, I invite you to subscribe to Studio SN on YouTube, and I'll keep you updated with a new video and a blog post every Wednesday. Thank you for joining me on Studio SN, and I'll see you again next time.